Let's cut to the chase. You're here because I said I would probably do this. Watch the Generation Zero 2020 content review. Things and thoughts carry over. Generation Zero has fundamental problems with its gameplay foundation, story, and most important, connecting the latter two, the tone. First, I'm going to split this video into 3 segments. The core experience. This is the important one and the one you should stay for. Pay the DLC. And my unrealistic wants. This way it should be clearer to what I deem essential to improving Generation Zero from a more realistic perspective, but also give my unrealistic wants. By which I mean content that could be added but should not be the priority. However, even though I try to present realistic ideas, them being realistic or not, that is for the developers to decide really. While I know more about the process thanks to the beta program I was in, I can't really be expected to fully 100% know the process and what goes on behind the scenes. And before I forget, because this is actually important, this video and everything else that I have reviewed and given thoughts for Generation Zero come from a well-meaning place. Recently, they have come out as harsh, and yeah, I could have toned it down a bit with the Resistance review. However, most of my frustrations come from being a genuine enjoyer of this game and having to deal with people who label everything me and a whole lot of other people say as haters or keyboard warriors. It is very tiring to have a discussion about something, but instead people ignore everything and just focus on the fact that I or someone else didn't like something. If people think that I believe that my thoughts on the game are better than others, that is not true. I genuinely want to have civil discussion about ideas, but I don't want discussions that end up being like this. Replies like these seem only to have the goal of dismissing and neglecting to see the difference between constructing criticism and anything but hate. Usually we don't bring up points and arguments that actually respond to someone else's thoughts or any criticism, and honestly it's really only a waste of time with its goal to make someone angry. Something they usually claim to not want in the community. And I'll be honest, I spent lots of time and effort writing my reviews, not out of hate but because I genuinely liked the game, but not its current direction. But I will admit, I was more harsh on the Resistance update the way I expressed it. My opinions are more or less the same, but I could have worded them differently. I have spent lots of time and effort mainly just writing this one that you're about to watch. It's not really that easy trying to come up with ideas and ways that pleases everyone. So instead of spending useless time on the forums, I'm making this final Generation Zero video with the intention of having all of my current criticism and feedback in one place before I leave this community for good. Generation Zero feels like a sinkhole that was created because the road above it was not built properly. The fuskbygge was probably intentional, so let's add the promise to fix it by slowly adding tiny grains of sand in the sinkhole. The game came out bare bones with missions that treat you like a child, with content and diversity better than a Let's start with missions. Who designed them? For a game advertising and centers around the concept of finding clues and figuring out what the fuck happened to everyone, it treats that very concept as something to be done as fast as possible. Like I said in Generation Zero 2020 content review, the missions expect you to read the clues, the lines in between, and act like G.B. Persson. However, either due to bad direction or something else, the ones who programmed the missions made it so waypoints are placed on the map, or like in the bunkers, having the exact locations placed on the compass. With a game with not a whole lot of verticality, all you need to do is follow the symbols. The same is done with areas that require you to kill machines. The game ruins the excitement and threat levels by constantly showing where to shoot. This kind of game design subconsciously telegraphs to the player that they don't need to understand what's happening, only shoot, kill, and go to the next area. But what if I told you this could be fixed with one simple fix? Remove the icons on the compass and change the current mission objectives so they don't spoil the mission. This can just be an option, but it actually is. You can disable the point of interest in the settings. Has it ever worked? Of course not, it's still bugged. But aside from that, missions are designed to be investigated but programmed to be skimmed through. While it does not improve the constant cock-blocking of always finding dead or Norse survivors all the time, it at least does something to the patronizing mission design. I think it's obvious that we can't expect the developers to go back and change the missions for the base game, but the overall structure of missions should change for new content with more diversity in scripted sequences. The structure of go here and kill without doing any brain work, it is not fun. It's not memorable. Why? Well, think this. Most of the game is just grinding for materials so that you can pile up ammunition and medkits for more farming. The game does not incentivize exploration. This is bullshit because obviously the developers have been doing the revamp for the main map a while now. True, but fundamentally, using fast travel points to a random spot and shooting machines is actually wasting less time than walking for 15 minutes and looting randomly. Crafting meds and ammo makes this worthless when you can just Google it. I'm going off point for a second here. The revamps and new collectibles always hint at a greater story, but extremely rarely we never see anything done with it, which is why my main goal here is to come up with suggestions not to make Generation Zero grindy, but actually make sense of the gameplay to fit in with the Resistance story that is going on now. Generation Zero has a very big problem of tell and no show. The playable story we got with Phoenix Rising and the Resistance update is frankly awful, at least compared to Alpine Unrest and the base game. While flawed and repetitive, the base story at least had that great sense of mystery, even if told very generically. Alpine Unrest is peak Generation Zero and shows what the game could have been in visual design had the world revamps not been a post-game update. Plus, it turned up the dark and dreadful tone to 1000% in Himfjell. While the story for Alpine contained cheesy dialogue, it was justified through more interesting mission designs that brought tension and excitement. Generation Zero has a problem is that when it does introduce new lore, like the weapon packs and Reaper, they do a bad job of contextualizing it in the game. They are just kind of there and have no impact in the world going forward. They just exist. And like I've said before about the intro mission to the home base in my Resistance review, the trailers and the letter you find from Elsa make it seem like a big fucking deal, but it doesn't carry that sense of big fucking deal and just handles the lore to the barest minimum of bare minimum. Random bullshit, go! This one is gonna be a doozy, mainly because since skills are integral to the current core gameplay loop, changing them and coming up with a new solution is not something that can be expected. I will, however, present the idea of a new progression system in the last section of the video. Either way, I don't mind that skills stay the same way as they do, as I think there's more things that should be worked on before that. A main problem with skills is that since you can't respec your character, you're stuck with that build forever if you mess up. Well, just level up another character, you ask. Yeah, that is the solution. But it's grindy as fuck. Game world progress is carried over between characters, meaning that if you played a mission with character 1, then you can't play it for character 2. Character 2 will thus earn less experience points because the main source of experience is gone. By using the Plundra, you can of course use your best guns even early on the new character. However, it just ends up being more repetitive and feeling exhaustively grindy, because when you finally have your Nor character build, then for a lot of people, you're burnt out. Generation Zero's end content is grinding for experimentals, ammunition, and meds. While the home base does change up the grinding a little bit, the end rewards are still the same. You will end up with a bunch of items, but nothing new to shoot at. Nothing new that rewards the grind. So here's what can be done. First, let us respec characters when we reach max level. Second, make experience acquired from the first character transfer into the other ones. Considering that experience as a reward becomes useless for a max level character, then having experience transfer to another one would alleviate the grind a bit more. It gives the player more reasons to play, because honestly, Generation Zero has more grinding than a skateboard game. The intro mission should be more than just finding a letter and making a random truck magically appear. Here's how I would suggest it. We get a call from the Alpine gang. They want us to scout for a new location to call home. For now at least. We find a good spot in the forest. A bunch of trees would be hard for the robots to move, unless they blow it up, but a spot is found and we give the call. Now it's time to go supply runs for tents, wood, etc, etc, literally anything that can be used to build defenses and a home. Optionally, you could have an escort mission and at the end, a robot accidentally finds you. It ends with a horde mission that would introduce the home-based defense mechanic and you can fight with the Alpine gang. And then, boom, you have a home base. That way, the horde mission is introduced naturally through the resistance characters and story elements while giving the player indirect instructions on how the home base works during the questline. It would also actually make the resistance more active than just being told, instead of not shown. Obviously, there should be more craftable things that actually fit the theme of a home base, and to spice it up, when crafting more items and space, more NPCs show up around the base. Some can be assigned to do certain things, like if you get someone who perhaps worked at FUA, then they can craft experimental items for you if resources are given. If an architect or military personnel is found, then they can help build better defenses. Obviously, some of these, like a FUA scientist, should be harder to get than others. The main point is to tie the story with the gameplay and create a context where the player feels as if they are actually making a difference with the resistance, instead of then just making robots go deaf. The home base would also be a perfect opportunity to unlock daily and weekly missions from the FM Tel station. However, instead of being some random external force, let's put it in the context of the resistance. Let's call it the Resistance Scouting Network or something. Missions are given out by leaders or scouts that will help the player grow their home base, like for instance, blowing up a Phoenix base or checkpoint, destroying a machine convoy, find and help humans not aligned with the resistance and recruit them, scavenge runs by yourself, help fellow members scavenge and escort materials, specific NPC character missions, machine parts extraction, defend resistance members breaking down and collecting machine parts. And this is actually not a mission, but there could even be a box where you dump items and guns that you don't want that perhaps the NPCs can use instead. This can be expanded later, but daily and weekly missions should always stay on tone and be serious. Making bikes go fast or killing machines with bat isn't. Also, these shouldn't have to be locked behind the registration thing. Apex Connect, or whatever it's called, is completely unnecessary to the game right now. Daily and weeklies are a basic feature that shouldn't require more user data. Something so simple should just be in the game.
It's by me.
Wait, there's something in here.
Yeah, that's the mission. Don't go yet.
Yeah.
Oh, Avalanche Connect account. Don't care.
Where is it?
Right here.
NPCs could be more expanded than what I've already presented. For instance, NPCs can have their own stat. Let's use Metal Gear Solid V as an example. In that game, you have a mother base, and by kidnapping or getting volunteers with different stats, you can unlock new things to craft that improves the mother base, items for Venom Snake, etc, etc. Generation 0 should take note from MGSV, because if worked right, NPCs with stats could do a lot for the home base. If done right. For scientists as well, good with intelligence, but if they needed to defend the base, then they would more or less die. Thing is, at the start, we can't make the home base that initially big in terms of content. NPC complexity can stay at some NPCs have, their own thing to help unlock items or progress something. What we can start with is having some NPCs be able to train the NPCs that guard and defend the home base for better defenses. The current structure of having the horde mission be optional can stay, but just in case add an option to have machines attack be random. This way you can increase defenses and make the NPCs useful, plus give yourself a harder challenge of random attacks. With the idea of donating items, they can of course use them, but if they want to use guns that are more complex, like experimentals, then they would need to be max level. If all of this is done, or something similar, then growing the resistance is done naturally for gameplay and can be visually seen with a strong home base and resistance members having roles and mechanics. Due to the home base getting all the focus, current fast travel points should only be fast travel. Might as well also remove some fast travel points, because there's a lot of them, so they end up being really close to each other. While I personally would have removed an extreme amount, to only have safe house that, would make sense in the worlds, i.e. those in buildings or in caves, that can be too much. Anyway, no bike station or any form of crafting station. For bikes, they can be spawned at a home base. However, bikes can be pre-spawned in the world, so if the player finds a working bike, then it can be used. My argument for not having crafting stations that aren't in special places like home base or in military buildings is that, realistically, there's no reason for the resistance to hold these stations there. And since everyone is always using guerrilla tactics, same thing goes for bike stations. However, some house garages or stores can have them, but like I said before, not at a fast travel point. This could be a good compromise for those who want GC like it is now, and those like me who prefer to have the gameplay fit with the tone more, you know, like it used to. Though certain safe houses can have a small amount of items as a reward for finding them, sort of like it is now, I guess. For crafting, like previously with unlocking features, depending on the people you have in the home base, you can unlock more craftable items or the opportunity to unlock them. However, because the home base would be unlocked after the main mission, not having some sort of crafting would be boring. Without changing the whole skill and progression system, this idea will only be presented for crafting. Let's start with clothing. Instead of clothing being simple unlock, they will become loot items. Basically, you can have more than one item, but some are of course rarer than others. Clothing could have permanent stats like visibility or movement, for example, but can be upgraded. However, more types of stats would be needed. Some clothes are way too wacky. Instead of having recipes be random loot items and machine drops, the crown levels are retained, but the player starts out with 1 crown crafting unlocks for clothing. What can be upgraded is camo and armor additions. 1 crown starts out as what the everyman would think of, making them blend in with the environment, or try to make armor on the existing clothing. Basically, it will have a do-it-yourself kind of an aesthetic. An example being that you could attach machine armor as well. Armor, but since it's do-it-yourself and your character doesn't know how to break it down, they just strap it on. We can tie this into the home base. When you unlock it and get people who know how to make armor, you can give them materials and then they can make higher tier versions. It doesn't have to follow the crown system, but in terms of progression it could look like this. Do it yourself, military, resistance. There's a whole lot that can be done with this. However, we will keep it like this because otherwise it would be too complex, and we have to keep the dev team in mind when coming up with ideas. Last thing I'd suggest is having armor wear down over time, like in Fallout New Vegas and 76. Mainly because it would make it so you actually have to plan a bit more and have something to work towards if something breaks. It could give clothing that you have double of a purpose. If you don't have enough materials to repair a piece, you can use a spare that isn't used to fix it. Now for weapons. We will have the same idea as Apperal, but limited only to mods. However, it unlocks slightly differently from the latter, at least the do-it-yourself aesthetic. Military and resistance can unlock as before. Now, when using a gun over a set amount of time, the player's character will get more used to it and understand it a bit more. The character will also have an idea and a list of weapon mods for a gun that appear in a menu. However, you can only choose one at a time. Then the process repeats until all modifications for that gun are unlocked. Remember, they would have to fit in the everyman do-it-yourself theme. As a safeguard and for consistency, our character can only come up with ideas if materials have been gathered in a certain amount or at least have been previously looted. Without ruining the crown system of guns, we can still have degradation, but, you know, for guns. A reasonable compromise would be that if a 1 crown breaks, then you can only repair to 1 crown. However, again, just like mods, the player has to unlock that ability within time. Once you have unlocked the ability to repair 1 gun, all crown versions are also unlocked. However, the requirements get more difficult. Experimentals aren't included as they require the home base and certain objectives have to have been met. For items such as ammo and meds, well, that again ties back into the home base. You'll have to get resistance members that have certain skills to make them. It should be hard to get them, but in a way that isn't very grindy. However, of course, you can always find them just like before, you just can't craft them yet. For this one, it won't really be that complex, but it is something that will change the meta. For machines, they will drop only ammo that is used for its loadout, this explosive thingy, and some crafting materials. From smallest to biggest machine, the loot will increase, and depending on how much said machine was damaged, will impact loot chances. So medkits, recipes, and weapons won't drop. Before you raise your pitchforks, let me at least say that the harvester will stay as it is. My reasoning for this is that loot should be divided in its sources, instead of you being able to find guns both in the world and in machines. This would include my idea of the home base. Having more or less the whole source of loot be machines isn't really that much fun anymore. Once you hit max level and only kill machines to grind temporary items like ammo and meds, it gets stale. Weapons can be naturally spawned in the world like they currently are. However, progressing through the crown tiers can be done with bunkers. Each bunker could have an armory, and once you have completed a bunker mission, you are rewarded by being able to unlock the armory left behind by the military. It would have to be balanced in a way so that you don't become powerful, but rewarding enough so that you actually feel like progressing the game. And just to add it in, the bunker missions should probably have more variety than just, unlocking the generator. Crafting materials can also stay like it is now, but since I was talking about clothing as loot items, you can find them from dead bodies or in a place where clothing storage would make sense. Big emphasis on makes sense. I don't think I can explain it well, so here's a part of Puff's video, Generation 0 improving the game.
Loot logic would be how lootable items are found in the game and organize it in a manner that makes sense. The best example that need this change mostly are houses. Since houses have rooms that serve their own purpose, it could be so for loot too. Organized loot and items appropriated to their location are somewhat existent in the game already, and houses themselves have some sort of sense to the laid out items, but some things could just be shifted around a bit more to make even more sense and divide houses' areas into understandable points of interest. The player could then decide which rooms to enter and what they expect to find there. In a few examples, take this bathroom. There are others, but in this bathroom, there is a chance for an ammo box or toolbox to spawn in. These don't make much sense, and most of the time, they're own shells that would probably be smaller than the box itself. I'd like it if the loot was more centralized and more characteristic to what it actually is. An ammo box wouldn't need to be in a bathroom. In this game's logic, the regular homeowner has their own ammunition and weapon just in case. But that doesn't mean those ammo boxes have to be in every single room. That just shows how very paranoid the homeowner is that he needs to take a shit with an ammo box above his head in sudden events of an attack and still being stuck on the seat finishing their business. The toolbox though could make sense, but not so much to where it's put up on. Either the bathroom doesn't have a toolbox, or if there is such a thing as a storage rack or a free sink, put it under the sink or inside the storage shelves. The occasional radio, backpack, and health pack make more sense than an ammo box, teaching the player over time that specific rooms have conditions to spawn such and such loot containers, so the next time the player is in need, he can head straight for the room that has the biggest chance of having the proper container. Adjust the loot in houses to have bathrooms and kitchens be the most prominent to have health packs, not the whole house. Adjust living rooms and bedrooms to have the radios. Adjust backpacks and ammo cases spawn in more private rooms, like bedrooms and storage rooms. In fact, bring more variety of loot containers to have these items. Taking from Alpine Unrest, we have objects we could use on the main island. Have folded or piles of clothing be the dedicated lootable object to have some clothing item. In Alpine Unrest's resort, there were suitcases for this, but these wouldn't make much sense in personal homes. So in personal spaces, add more than this backpack to have clothing. Backpacks could have anything in them, but not ammo. Ammunition in houses would hide under beds or in storage areas. Health packs wouldn't be so clustered all around, even if it gives incentive to visit every room. Health packs, radios, and boomboxes in buildings are just everywhere and might be too much. I'd say cut down on the small med packs everywhere and put them in bathrooms and kitchens or storage rooms. Cut down on radios and boomboxes to be in living rooms, bedrooms, and kitchens, but not in the large amounts that there already are. Like, Jesus, there's a lot in every house. Cut down on the radios, please.
Compared to everything else, this could technically only work if there was more content with loot that made sense of the rewards. Either way, probably dividing the sources of loot and not having everything be machines could do a whole lot for the game and make it less grindy, or at least repetitive. In name, rivals aren't really rivals, just regular enemies with a chance of experimental loot and a unique name. Let's actually make them into rivals. First of all, they should be their own class, so as to visually and mechanically make them distinctive compared to regular machines. But they will start off as normal machines. You are perhaps asking yourself, what the fuck is he on about? Well, answer my question. When was the last time you were so overpowered but didn't have enough ammo so you didn't feel like dealing with machines attacking when you were just, walking, enjoying your day? So you shoot and kill some machines but some survive, and you run or perhaps let them kill you so that you can respawn. What I'm thinking here is that a surviving machine retreats to an unknown location and are upgrading to a rival class. Let's keep the rival levels, but let's give them a purpose. Level 1. An upgraded form of the machine is as strong as Apocalypse, will stay in its starting region. Level 2. Stronger than Apocalypse class and has upgrades and armaments tailored to its loadout based on the tactics you have used in the region, can roam in a neighbor region. Level 3 will actively hunt you down in its region. Now, level 2 is when the rival really becomes the rival. When I say tailored to your tactics, I mean things like more night vision or heat cameras if you kill a machine stealthily in the day or night. More advanced machine behavior in general. Something actually tailored to be your rival. But every machine can't become a rival. The machines that can turn into rivals are runners, hunters, and tanks. Harvesters will serve a different purpose because its main job is, harvesting materials. Rivals currently don't feel like rivals. They feel more like crops. Due to that, it's better to save up and level them instead of finding them right away, because you have a higher chances of experimental items and the Reaper being spawned. Even so, rivals are basically useless until you hit level 25, so there's really no reason for them to spawn until said level is reached. Going into Reaper is gonna be a doozy. First off, the description that appears when Reaper spawns isn't needed. It utterly destroys any form of mystery by spoiling its movesets, especially considering the fact that this information is coming from an external source, not from anyone else in the game. If the Reaper is a serious threat, then why isn't the Resistance talking about it? Wait, I forgot. We are in the Hotel Schilling. The devs and the game are only saying that the Reaper is dangerous, but doesn't let us experience that ourselves the first time around. Let's change that. Instead of being a confusing mess of region score and RNG, the Reaper will spawn after a set amount of level 3 tank rival kills. You will get a mission from the Resistance in the home base, stating that strange and loud noises have been heard in several FOA locations where these giant platforms exist. You and some friends are given the objective to conduct recon at FOA 2, and during the investigation, the Reaper appears from the platform, but it seems to be unfinished. This being the only time you fight it as a free roam boss around FOA 2. When that phase is over, it retreats into the tunnels beneath FOA 2. This would lead into a maze-like tunnel system where the players have to fight off machines while solving puzzles and trying to find the Reaper. Once you have made it into the machine factory made just for the Reaper, you watch it as it's a new weapon or attached. Then you fucking fight it. In my version of the Reaper, it won't be the normal free roam boss and will instead be more of a traditional scripted boss with phases. If you have played Destiny, think of it as a strike mission. Anyway, I think it would be more fun and engaging to have to solve puzzles and mechanics instead of the Reaper being a bigger bullet sponge than vanilla Destiny 1 bosses. Instead of the thermobaric bomb, the Reaper's main weapons will be two giant fucking sniper railgun rifles on its shoulders? Or legs? The thing. Either way, something that visually makes you think, oh no, oh shit, oh fuck. The rewards for the Reaper will be different. Instead of the exosuit and experimental sledgehammer, you know what, they are stupid. Let's just get rid of them entirely. Sorry, off track. After Reaper has been defeated, a small group of resistance members will start to dismantle and bring the materials back to the home base. The following items that can be unlocked should be home base defensive items and crafting materials for said items, an armor set that gives the player increased defenses and carry capacity, increased home base morale, a permanent boost where the progress of unlocking new items from the resistance members is higher and members in the field have upgraded stats. And of course, loads of ammo, depending on the weapons that the Reaper has. You could possibly fight it again. However, it would require a new mission to move the story forward without it being treated as a flashback every time. Rewards would also have to be tweaked, but I think you get the general concept. Silmakan, during the writing process, mentioned his thoughts for this that I wanted to share. I think many people also share his wish. He thought that it perhaps could have been a form of a raid, with the players going down to another island, which I honestly also wish for when it was being teased on Twitter. I've said so many times by now, but truly, the Reaper was peak Generation Zero mystery post Alpine Unrest, together with Bunker 666. Well, I'm kinda glad Bunker 666 hasn't gotten more development because my hopes are so low now. Either way, the Reaper represented the potential of the game, and thus, when it was released, it was just another coat of paint with boring mechanics. It technically was something new, but nothing that felt interesting. It feels like it was initially supposed to be, I don't know, a raid boss or something, but again was downgraded to be fixed later. Maybe it will actually become a raid boss later, I don't know. I've seen shit, but I don't know, but it would be kind of weird to have, fight the same enemy twice. But you never know. You might have noticed that I did not mention experimental guns in the rival section. That's because that they will not drop experimental guns anymore, or at least directly. Instead, having experimental items will require some form of questing. Once you have unlocked a special FOA scientist, or several of them, and killed enough rivals, you will unlock a FOA quest. For the sake of balance, from the weakest to toughest machine, the point that amounts to unlocking the quest will be different values. Either way, the quest starts with a FOA scientist acknowledging that machines are tougher and that the player character needs more advanced weapons. Note, this quest would predate the arrival of the Reaper, mainly because the Reaper would be a good response to us getting the plans for experimental guns. The FOA scientists talk about the FOA group that started development on experimental weapons that was shut down in the planning phases, due to them not following the rules of warfare and were too inhumane. However, the current situation of machine invasion, the rules of warfare are now different. The mission is to sneak into a FOA facility and steal the plans. Phoenix has started to build walls around the facility, but it's incomplete, so it's heavily guarded. However, there's a tiny slip that you can enter. This is basically some Metal Gear Solid kind of stealth, with new mechanics that greatly make the stealth experience much better than a broken aggro. Once you have found a way into the FOA facility, you start to navigate the abandoned labs and offices. The lab for experimental guns is found but tightly locked. However, there's a trail of slight destruction and blood. Someone was here. Following the trail deeper, you notice that a machine is walking around. Maybe even several. By avoiding the noises, you see in the distance of the corridor a human bleeding out. Doesn't seem to be a resistance or a FOA personnel. Sadly, they die before you can reach them, but they carry the keys needed to enter the lab containing the experimental weapon plans. However, the machines are starting to act up and the general anxiety and tone increases. It's time to get what you came for and really get the fuck out of there before shit hits the fan. The overall theme of the FOA facility is mystery, dread, anxiety, and grounded. Basically dark, as it should be. Once you have the plans, you return them to the FOA scientist and you can now craft the weapons. After you, of course, have given them the materials, weapon parts, and complete a unique mission for every weapon that involves in them acquiring the parts for the special gimmick that each weapon has. With experimental ammo and medkits, I am very unsure of them, because experimental weapons are already overpowered as they are, and more experimental items would make the character way too much overpowered. And the healing items like healing bullets, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, yeah, let's shoot yourself to fix bullet holes. Try to rationalize that. Despite the rivals and the Reaper being added, the machines aside from the Apocalypse class have been largely unchanged. Something I haven't really thought about until now is that the machine AI needs an update. Once you really have a lot of ammo and meds, fighting them isn't a challenge, aside when they are in large numbers. But then it's really if you have set ammo, meds and adrenaline on hand. I'd be down for an update just about giving machines more behavior and depth. Their current movesets are starting to be very boring. There has been small changes here and there, but nothing really that makes them different in a significant way from before. Oh, by the way, the machines don't react to flashlights. I don't know why this never got fixed, but I really hope it is, because it's really weird. And also in general, this will be better for stealth and when you're setting traps. Because aggro is kind of broken right now. Or really not that good. The quality of paid DLC has been iffy at best. Not necessarily bad, but not really that great either. There needs to be a clear line of quality between free updates and paid DLC, because currently only Alpine Unrest has truly felt like an expansion to the game compared to Phoenix Rising, that only added 10 main and side missions yet had the same cost as the latter. Even if the content that was technically free, being melee and revamps, the quality and even quantity ratio doesn't feel the same as Alpine Unrest. Of course, they can't be locked behind a paywall, since World Revamps has always been part of the free content. In terms of quantity value, Phoenix Rising should have been less than Alpine. And the term free is something I want to talk about. As you most likely know, Generation Zero was launched in a massively rocky state, buggy and barebones content with the big intention of adding and fixing later. The next chapter, that has its own little section on the website, is what bothers me a lot with the term free. All that's really in the next chapter is promises. Perhaps even a guarantee. And what I see is a disguised early access game, and we are the beta testers. And that's why I think the opinion of tone and gameplay differs for a lot of people in the community. I always got the impression that Generation Zero would be a story-focused game. The base game missions were a product of a bigger story. That's at least what I hoped it to be. And for many people, it's more about the setting taking a backseat and let the gameplay be its own thing. I mean, the story was fun to think about, to theorize and talk with other people about. While perhaps not in quality, there is a lot of quantity in the story. And that's why I watched Puffy's Generation Zero videos, because he was able to perfectly get you interested and piece all the puzzle pieces together. But now? What story is there to be enjoyed right now? Nothing really. There's always been hints about various story elements in the story. But have we ever seen them come to fruition? Aside from the still teased Soviets? No, not really. And that's the thing. We are constantly getting the bare minimum in hoping for something greater. But it's free, right? Does it matter? Well, yeah, it does. Because for some people, depending on when they got the game, they paid for it. While I don't have a problem with paid content, they can't be justified when they aren't given proper treatment to fit in the game for gameplay story. The argument has always been devs gotta make money somehow. While I do agree, I think it's a bad argument to justify cheap and lazy DLC. You know what that means! Weapon packs I've already given my thoughts on, but for the last time I'll explain them. New weapons that come as its own pack should contain a quest line that contextualizes the gun's existence by giving them lore and add to Generation Zero's world building, without having to grind mindlessly for them. For instance, if they add more modern guns for the 80s, then they can be their own class called imports, or rare in service, but have the stats that of a 5-crown gun. For their lore and quest, it can vary depending on what gun it is. A quick example can be guns that either the police or military were testing for normal use, but were never fit for service. However, in rare places, they can be found in a storeroom, but through a quest that is really hard, or at least requires thinking. Then if they added World War II guns, then well, That could be classified as World War guns. They could have 2 qualities. Battle-worn, that would be found in a veteran's home, or at least someone has it. Either way, it wasn't maintained and needs new components to work properly. It would fire, but randomly cause damage to the player or have a random bullet spread. These would be more common, but would be close to around 1 crown to 3 crown in terms of quality. The second would be preserved. These are guns that have been properly maintained in museums or from a gun enthusiast home. However, they miss the fire mechanism and thus also need crafting to properly work. When fixed, it would be as powerful as a 5 crown gun. Fixed battle-worn versions would turn into preserved when they are fixed. This way, gun packs would add more to the game's story and world building, but also feel rewardful, probably also less boring than grinding RNG. Because currently, weapon packs are borderline pay-to-win cash grabs. The current weapon packs that are now released is a US one and a Soviet one, and a second US one has currently been announced. As of currently recording this audio, they don't have any form of lore representation in the game. They just appear in the plunder like fucking magic. Remember when I said borderline pay to win? For those that didn't watch the Generation 0 2020 content review, weapon packs add the 3 crown versions directly in the player's plunder. The rest has to be obtained from machines through mindless grinding. For new players, it's basically pay to win in a sense that you already have 3 crown weapons even before you can take the shitty 1 crown Muller. And in terms of chosen countries so far, only the Soviet one has made sense compared to the US pack. The current Soviet weapon pack is at least somewhat justified by the current revamps that have been done to the map that add new dead Soviet soldiers. Despite that, the guns being just in the plunder explanation is terrible and it should have been as an in-game quest. As for the US, I think it's the most laziest and easiest ones because how much representation they already have in games. When I honestly think they could and very much still can use more actual geographically and historically accurate weapons that make more sense. I made a video about that topic, so I won't dwell more into it now. However, despite the versions of gun packs I presented, I still don't think they are necessary in the current state of Generation 0 at all. Instead of adding value and fun, the weapon packs we have gotten feel more like a head scratcher due to them just being guns. They don't have lore or quest, it's just guns that don't add anything to the game in terms of world building and interest. They just exist. And with the potential of the lore, that's really not good. Currently, Alpine Unrest and Phoenix Rising are the DLCs that add to the story. However, Phoenix Rising introduced a problem that has yet to be fixed, and that is focus. The story of GC is a bit fragmented, in a sense that the base story provides all the mysteries, but the DLCs don't create a cohesive expansion. Well, sometimes answers are given, and threads move, but it's so slow, and the long time between story expansions don't help. This extends to new free updates as they introduce or tease new plot elements, yet do with them little effort or nothing at all. What I think is that story expansions need to actually feel like expansions. I honestly want all paid non-cosmetic DLC to have a price increase, if it means more resources devoted to them, and help fund free content as well. Alpine Unrest became the standard that has yet to be replicated, as Phoenix Rising felt more like a side mission with dialogue that would make the room look like a masterpiece in writing and focus. Well, nah. That is an insult to the room. It is a good movie after all. What I meant with GC, that needing a line between free and paid content, is that they can have updates like current home base, but that kind of content also needs more lore than random text. It needs to be contextualized both in gameplay and story. Free updates. Fixes or content that add to the game's foundation that is necessary for all players, like quality of life updates and small features. The way current weapon packs, for instance, are done can lead to oversaturation of paid weapons, and currently it has become quantity over quality. I have said it so many times that you most likely know that right now I'm about to say that Generation Zero has major story problems, and it's a message I will always repeat. Economics aside, if an update is going to have or introduce story/plotline that is very important in the context of lore, then it needs to be paid. Because with how the story in the Resistance update was handled in mind, makes Phoenix Rising look like a fucking masterpiece. The reason is because the Resistance update, while advertising itself as something bigger, is just a prologue to a potential story. That was not to say free content can't have a story, but if anything, it should be self-contained, yet have a reason to be in the world. So simply, nothing that can take away or add to the main story. The Resistance update didn't feel like anything of its name. The Resistance have no part of the story other than being text, and the things we can build are just defenses for a truck. Sure, it's all just because of initial rollouts. You're gonna add more, they always say. I'm thinking, what the fuck? What's the reason to make a big deal in both lore and trailer of this Resistance when it's not finished? It felt more like Resistance update version 0.00000000001. It's been 2 years. When will something finished and complete be released? Paid DLC. Focus on quality with story and new content that isn't necessary for the foundation. The story shouldn't be directly moved forward in free updates, as the quality of writing will be compromised thanks to other things taking resources. It's not within the developer's best interest to put effort in writing in that case. Phoenix Rising failed for this reason, as it was released with a free update. So more resources that could have gone to better mission designs and somewhat decent writing was spent on the revamps. Revamps with their visual storytelling can never be a good substitute for something yourself can experience with your own eyes. I think it's a bad excuse. Visual storytelling is thrown around as if it's something unique in the game. If they aren't gonna care about revamp continuity, then suddenly visual storytelling doesn't make sense. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the world detailed and feel lived or have been lived. I'd rather spend money on something that has a decent story, cohesion, themes, plot, and most importantly, no patronizing writing that is giving away excuses instead of admitting and improving. There clearly was a vision for Alpine Unrest. Why don't you use it? Some economics apply here as well. Alpine Unrest was underpriced and Phoenix Rising was overpriced, the latter being a good thing and the other bad. Alpine being a good thing and Phoenix Rising bad. Alpine for many felt good because the price was cheap. €8 or $8 for that is a steal. Phoenix Rising was overpriced because it made half the overall update free. The game's paid content tread on cheap as quality as in price. Paid weapons are the best example of this, and I think that is what is holding the game back, because even if paid, the quality won't really be guaranteed to be there. Right now, it's undersell, underdeliver. When they do a potential story free, then I would rather follow the same path as Alpine Unrest than Phoenix Rising. Alpine Unrest had a good value, good quality and quantity. Phoenix Rising had cheese. Lots and lots of cheese. And of course it was a bad DLC. Considering the idea of having cosmetic items actually have functional purpose, having a paid cosmetics pack would lean into pay to win. Currently, there hasn't been a cosmetic pack in a long time, so really, the solution if clothing had stats now is to simply not have paid cosmetics. Personally, I'd rather have the devs use their time and resources invested in meaningful paid DLC, such as story content. I don't really need to explain much here. I strongly believe that at least mod support can carry the game's lifespan much longer after the devs update it. Most of the things I've talked about in the game would be somewhat possible if modding tools existed. I personally really want to make a Generation Zero balance mod, and if I could, maybe even a story mod. Safe to say, there's so much that can be done with Generation Zero's rather broken foundation. It would be a good way for people to tailor the game to their own wants. The people who love mindless grinding can have that, and people who want Generation Zero's original tone and atmosphere back could have that. Now, to make this balanced and fair, it would be better to have a separate client. So when you launch the game, you can choose between the main game and the modded game, so that cheating would be less in the main game. Server hosting could be another layer of the modded version, where people can self-host servers and sessions. I really think role players would like that. Of course, just creating these things would take up a lot of time and resources for the Generation Zero devs, unless they have another team that is using the same game engine to make it. While the main devs can focus on their thing, it would be a big investment. But with good Steam Workshop integration and tools, Generation Zero could live on far longer. Something I have not really given much thought of is how the revamps have affected the story for the people who are just now getting into the game. Before the release of Phoenix Rising, there wasn't really any revamps for the map that reflected the current story, at least not in a significant way. Alpine Arrest was on another island, so the main map didn't suffer from this. But either way, sometimes I wonder what part of the revamp takes part during the current non-existing story events or happened before the base game missions. For instance, when I started playing back in 2019, most of the game still had more empty buildings, but not the very same houses were destroyed. If take the starter island as example, new people are meant to believe that citizens just left. There wasn't a sign of struggle or war. Its purpose is to ask the question. But now, the revamps answers them before it can be asked. So what I honestly want for new players is that the developers considering making an update fixing this, making it so that when the stories progress during certain parts, the map changes alongside it. I'm not honestly sure this would work, as it would mean more downloaded assets, but there has to be a way for it to work. Either way, I think it's better to have it than not. It does a major disservice to the story that was so heavily cared about when it mattered. This isn't as fleshed out as it could have been, but I at least want to get it out there. Alright, so skills in the game are really hit or miss, and since you can't respec the character, you kinda feel fucked when something goes wrong. So let's split the skill tree into two different ways of progression: ability perks and passive stats. Let's start with the latter. Almost every skill is just stat changes and are honestly not very fun to play around with, due to them not really being something you notice even once you have them. So instead, my idea of passive skill progression is that they increase the more you do a thing. For example, let's take carry weight. You start with the normal set carry weight, and to increase it, you have to carry lots of items, and over time, your character's strength will increase and thus the carry capacity. For ability perks, they are obtained through different means. Lockpicking, for instance, requires you to find a lockpicking kit that someone has given to you or left behind. However, it would only really work on civilian type buildings. To unlock more locks, you have to complete quests that reward you with better kits. Ability perks can tie in with the home base, as you can learn new things depending on the people that you have. A FUA scientist could perhaps teach you to hack FUA buildings and maybe even some Phoenix structures. Unlocking new crafting for the do-it-yourself portion and being able to repair guns will start as just being able to craft certain cosmetics as a passive skill. Once you have leveled up this skill a certain amount by crafting items or crafted all of them, you will unlock the Dismantle 1 Crown Gun ability perk, which over the course of the game can be leveled up to 5 crown, with different requirements and maybe quests. For the sake of balancing, once you have dismantled a gun, then you have unlocked the ability perk to repair them. Considering that the protagonists are teens, having the progression feel natural would not only strengthen their in-game lore growth, but also the player's mechanical growth. Being able to do stuff out of nowhere isn't fun in the context of the game's world. Plus, this idea will make you feel as if the strength was a reward through thinking, not grinding. One final note is that ability perks shouldn't become oversaturated and become quantity over quality. Better to have less good than too much bad. This one doesn't really need a whole lot of explanation and depth, or at least I wanna limit this to prevent it being way bigger than it needs to be. Basically, consider everything I presented in this video as a basis for the mode. In terms of balance, the carry weight will be reduced. You take more damage. Machines take less damage. Nerfed medkits. No more adrenaline shots as a revive. Reduced safe houses, the need to sleep, rest, and the addition of food and drinks. Except for that dot in the middle of the screen, there's no more HUD elements, and that includes the compass. The same goes for the map, it's now diegetic. This means that you actually have to pull out the map in the game to navigate. Due to this, map markers are now gone, and if you want to use a compass, then it's an item you'll have to find. To alleviate this, a basic map of the starter island can be found in the house the player starts at. However, it's only a map that a civilian would have, so any buildings that are more secret and confidential aren't on them. Instead, you have to find more types of maps to fill out your main one. This means that buildings that aren't on your basic map are not automatically added to it like it is now. To compensate, you can draw on maps and thus mark locations that you want to explore, remember where ammo spawns. As for loot distribution, it's basically the same idea I had for its segment before, but increased to 100% towards more realism. The downside of this is that it would require more types of building variants, such as hospitals, more types of stores, etc, etc. Plus, not have every item be in an ammo box and backpack. This means that skills would have to be balanced differently as well, but that's a can of worms I'm not gonna touch. As for how damage and health works, as perhaps noted with no adrenaline shots, taking damage is gonna be on you. First, depending on the caliber of the shot, you will bleed at various rates. Stopping the bleeding is done by medkits that will play an animation where you got shot. If you wanna spice it up, make the animation speed different depending on how much damage was taken. Bandages and any form of textile clothing can be used to stop bleeding, but obviously proper medkits will yield more chances of survival. Something to note that you will not regain health with medkits. They will only stop bleeding. This means you take permanent damage. Experimental medkits will not exist, nor experimental healing ammo. They are lazy attempts for depth and ruins the lore. Also, it's kinda stupid that you can shoot yourself to heal yourself, yeah. When it comes to progression and if, using my previous example of how passive stats growth, doing it would need a balance, so that you actually have proper consequences and not just only positive things. The strength stat would be increased over time by carrying more items over the technical limit, introducing an energy limit that is connected to sprint, movement, aiming, and of course, carry weight that would also need to be rebalanced, as to not make the character exhausted with debuffs. At this point, I think you get what I want out of a potential survival mode. A survival/hardcore mode isn't necessarily needed, but if it were ever to come, I'd rather have it at the end of the game's life cycle. There's plenty of more things that require resources and attention that I believe should take priority. Despite the fact that I really want this to be added, because having a silent protagonist is doing more harm to the story. Knowing the resources and current writing, it won't happen. And if it did, I would not have confidence in it. The reason the story suffers is that because the character is silent, they actually speak off screen. Because of this, the character is void of personality and depth. People usually give the argument that with silent protagonists, the player can insert their own personality. While true, it can't apply to every game that does this. Games like the recent Doom do the silent protagonist good because they find ways to visually show Doom Guy's personality. Generation Zero doesn't do that, it only implies it. Sidmakan, a person whom you perhaps know, have read my script and given feedback, has actually presented a good example when I asked him if the game's protagonist that isn't the Resistance needed a voice. He recently played Far Cry 3 and 5. For him, playing through Far Cry 3 as Jason has created far more immersive experience than what 5 did with the Silent Deputy. Generation Zero already has the room for immersion with its graphical fidelity and general world atmosphere. And he is 1000% right about it. Having also played those games, with Jason you could feel a connection to the world and the other characters through his interactions. With the Deputy, well, there's nothing to bounce off with the other characters. But despite that, the game at least tries to give some personality with animations. It's just not the same when the story feels like it's about the supporting characters rather than you, even if you're the one pulling the workload. Jason went through a story arc in 3, turning into a killing machine when at the start, he was just a party douchebag. While the deputy goes through certain similar events, the emotional connection is just not the same. And that is exactly why Generation Zero has failed in that aspect. Even though you play a story, it never feels like your character is truly part of it. Imagine if they did have voices, or a personality. Think to the start of the game. You stand alone in the night after your boat got shot. You're supposed to be scared, but is your character that in the game? No! But if they were, oh boy, the possibilities! Imagine having your character, who is a teen, having to deal with a giant change of life path, having to survive a war against machines instead of living the normal life. Imagine the growth of them being more bitter during the base story of never finding survivors. That could actually be depressing as fuck. But once Alpine Unrest rolls around, then they truly have something to live for. The amount of ways it could make the world of Generation Zero actually feel meaningful, it's all there. Whoever's in charge of the story simply doesn't give a shit. The change to have the game now take place in the 1990s doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Well, a large portion of the game is so. Are you really surprised at this point? As of right now, we have the base game, Alpine Unrest and Phoenix Rising for story progression. Well, you can't technically count the Resistance update. But the information is, terrible. Most of the stories that we get are either in random collectibles or hints from the world revamps, though that isn't exactly true. Really, the story since Phoenix Rising has been through those methods mentioned, and I'll be honest, that is not good, because it's a loss of potential. There's nothing wrong with side stories, but due to the fact that we can't experience them and only read or potentially find a location with significance, creates a problem. Most players will probably not process the information the same way as if it was something they could experience. They might, and most likely, will only pick up collectibles, read the contents once, and forget about it. Because of this, the story doesn't have much of a cohesive narrative. For their lack of diversity, at least a proper story mission could have made the journey of getting the information within the collectible. The development of factions, such as the Resistance, have suffered the consequences of this. Collectibles, and of course my best example, the Resistance update trailer, makes it seem like they are a developed group. Disappointingly, the truth is that they as a faction has an identity is only told, not shown. In reality, it is really exposition, and for all we know, it doesn't exist. While these collectibles would make some believe that the world feels lived in, it does, in fact, do the opposite. NPCs are still at their last known location when the DLC ends. They do not speak either. It feels strange to always miss fellow survivors, to always randomly find their traces just after they left. Never a glimpse, never a sound. They have always been at their hiding spots. And that's why I think it's stupid to move Generation Zero into the 90s. It gives a false illusion of progression. If it existed, we should have been part of it. At least most of it. Are we not the protagonist of the story? If we don't experience it, then is it really our story? I wanted that part to sound really cool at the end, but fuck it. It's more ranting time before the end. Okay. The date is July 16th as of writing this video. And today, the dev letter announced something. Generation Zero is getting a weapon wheel, and it doesn't just include the same slots as before, but different. Oh no, you can have more than 3 weapons now, equipped at all time. Like, I honestly thought that Generation Zero couldn't fuck with its tone and atmosphere more than it already has. But this takes it to a whole nother level. You can now basically become a Grand Theft Auto protagonist and carry every single weapon you have in the inventory at all times. What happened to planning? What happened to strategy? Being limited gave a challenge of finding focus and use for a loadout. That is how the game was advertised. That is what made it fun in some ways. Sure, you technically already can carry more guns, but you couldn't switch them mid-combat. Going through the inventory menu was a damn hassle mid-combat. But now that experimental ammo and meds have been introduced, there's nothing stopping you to become God with this wheel. If the extreme tone shift in the game's story and atmosphere to the overall marketing is going to continue, then Generation Zero has truly lost its soul and potential. But of course, turn Generation Zero to another soulless mediocre game with end content and reasoning that doesn't exist, and instead is replaced with filler grinding. I don't know about you, but it seems the fix it later mentality isn't working. Because there's so much more that could have been fixed than adding this. Prestige points! There, I'm finally done. This couldn't have been done properly without the help of Silmaken and Brödkanten, whom have read and given feedback on the script during the process, checking if the things I have suggested here would fit and be good for the game. I think it's more than obvious that you should at least check their channel out. Of course, the support from Burger Player, Mark, also known as Vietnam Seeker, Puffy, Jim Jammy, and Random One is always appreciated. As for Generation Zero, it's been pretty obvious if you saw the last episode of Generation Zero Gear that I'm done with the game. Am I making it a little dramatic? Yeah, but I just wanted to end it in a way that it's obvious and just finish what I wanted to do with Generation Zero. I hate myself for being a little overdramatic about a game like this, so I hope it won't happen again. I'm sorry if it does. I don't have a huge following, but better to say that you won't be expecting more Generation Zero content from me unless the game becomes good again. Generation Zero, in my opinion, had something good, but threw it away. If there's one thing out of this whole video I really want, then it's mod support and server hosting. Because then I could at least tailor Generation Zero to my, and others, their preferences, and the developers could update the normal game with how they want it. Right now, I can't even play 5 minutes without getting bored and mindlessly wasting my ammo. I tried making this video shorter and more concise. I got some feedback about the last video with it being exhaustively long and could have been more concise. Honestly, it didn't really give me much to go on, but in my defense, it was covering a year's worth of Generation Zero. If I didn't decide to split this video from the review, then it would have been so much longer, because initially it was written to be one video, but it would have taken much longer to make. Because initially, Generation Zero 2020 content review and this video was supposed to be one, but I decided to make them two separate videos because otherwise it would have taken me far longer to make. Despite the recent Generation Zero videos coming out as harsh, everything has come from a well-meaning place. I just wanted to really love this game because with its potential, it filled the hole that I needed. Sadly, now I believe it has lost its potential and done more harm than good. It had the plans for a very strong identity. It had the foundation, but traded it for mediocrity. Even though I had motivation to both write and record, plus edit this video, there hasn't been a whole lot of passion into it. This isn't the video where I improve my presentation in a significant way. This is the video where I just get the information out there with good enough visuals that get the point across. I just don't care anymore. Though I'm still salty about Pontus not fulfilling his promise of me being a guest on DevStream. Not that salty, but a little salty. Pontus, if you're watching this, can I at least buy one of those t-shirts that you send to people sometimes? I want to give money for it. Or is that only for people who don't give criticism to your game? Like my man, I sent you that letter when you asked for one in that one stream. Didn't that mean something? Have I not been fair? It's not like my views went from positive to negative in one night. The we will fix it later mentality won't work forever. Just in general, this game feels like it needed a solid 3 more years of development and be for PC, Xbox Series X and S, and PlayStation 5 only. I have the feeling that higher up management wanted the developers to release the game sooner. Hence, the bare-bones story and buggy mess that was the vanilla release of Generation Zero, or the game was intended to be bare-bones, but fixed later. Either way, it doesn't work in my opinion, because now they have gotten more work ahead than they could probably handle. The game's world is really fucking big, because currently they are still doing world revamps, and it seems that in general resources is scarce. But the game was never and still isn't labeled as early access, and it certainly isn't a live service. So what's the goal here? If you're like me and are tired from Generation Zero, I can recommend 2 games. They can't fill the hole, but they are at least there. Fallout 76. While far from the best Fallout in story and world building, New Vegas, I do believe that it does everything aside from graphics and a feel of shooting way better than Generation Zero. You can play around with perks, you can build bases far more complex, you can craft items with far more purposes and consequences. You can play events, your armor and weapons can break down, you can also talk and serve a purpose. Generation Zero doesn't do that. Generation Zero is discount Fallout 76. Deus Ex, specifically Mankind Divided. The game provides an extremely small world in size compared to Generation Zero, but for the better as it's more dense. Exploring is always encouraged, and there's always something to find and discover that is meaningful. While the main story suffered because of Square Enix, everything else is really good in my opinion. Also, hot tip, turn the music up. You won't regret it. Of course, I can recommend Human Revolution and the original Deus Ex, though the first Deus Ex requires more work for it to run properly. Either way, I believe most of the negatives are outshined by the positive. So if anything, play Deus Ex, you will have a good fucking time. I won't dwell deeper for those games. It's better that you have a look for yourself. This video is long enough, but I wanted to mention them just in case. Thanks for watching. I hope at least some of my efforts here are somewhat recognized.